Welcome back to Rocker's Beer Review. Today we're doing a music review. Those of you that are into progressive rock music will know that last week was the release of the brand new album by Steven Wilson called the Harmony Codex. What I usually do when I do a review from an album is that I write a little script and then I sort of read the script out like a newsreader would the news, really. But this time I thought, instead of having a script, I just thought I'd have some notes here that I've made and just to talk about the album. So, as I said, the Harmony Codex, brand new album by Steven Wilson. Those that don't know who Steven Wilson is, well, where have you been? Steven Wilson started a band called the Porcupine Tree back in the 90s, and he's basically been seen as the sort of, I don't know, is he the top prog rock man that there is out there? But he's done lots of stuff as Porcupine Tree. Lots of things with some other bands as well, like No Man and Blackfield. And also, he over the last sort of a dozen or more years, he's been a solo artist. I say dozen, it's probably more like 15. It's probably more like 25 years, actually, when I think about it. No, probably not that many. But certainly this century, he's been a solo artist as well. Had, five or so albums out. This is why I need to have a script, really, because I'm going all over the place. But really what I wanted to sort of talk about is this album. So it's come out, and the last album I think was knocked back a bit. Steven Wilson does things that he wants to do. He doesn't sort of bow to sort of musical trends or what the fans want to hear. I mean, yeah, people like Steven Wilson and like Porcupine Tree, and they want him to do a prog rock or prog metal album, and he won't do it. No, he won't do it. He wants to, every album, in the true sense of the word progressive, he wants to be doing new things, and he wants to be bringing in new sounds, have new musicians to work with, and basically have a different sort of vibe in every album. Secretly, I also think he wants more success. He wants more media attention. He wants more of the mainstream to tap into what he's doing, because the last few albums, a lot of the stuff has been more mainstream, but because he's sort of known as the prog rock guy, he probably doesn't get the sort of non-prog rock press, or non-prog rock fans don't really know anything about him, which is a bit of a shame. He's trying to jump out of that. And obviously, because he tries to go less progressive, a lot of the prog rock fans that have supported him all his career start to become a little bit annoyed by him. But this album, so some context, the last album he did was called The Future Bites, a very electronic, not much in the way of guitar, wasn't sort of riff sort of laden, wasn't very, it was progressive in some ways, such as a band like Massive Attack could be progressive, but not in the rock sense. It was a very non-rock album on purpose. And I think a lot of people weren't big fans of it. I thought there was a few things that were all right, some interesting stuff, but it wasn't my kind of music, and all of it was quite in that similar vein. The album before that, which also got a little bit derided as well by his fans, was To the Bone. It was seen as much more poppier. Yes, the songs were there. Yes, there was, the traditional guitars, keyboards, drums, and all the rest of it. It wasn't as much electronic as The Future Bites. And there's some really good songs on that album. So where does this new album, the Harmony Codex, appear? I mean, in the pre-run-up to this album, he talked about it being not going to be a progressively guitar-orientated album, but it was going to be a sort of concept album which gets people excited. There was going to be long and short songs and all the rest of it. So people got excited about it. And certainly the first few songs that they released were very enjoyable. And we'll talk about a bit more of them when I go into detail the actual track listing. But ultimately, let me give you a sort of a summary introduction at the front end. So this band, this album, cinematic I've written down, progressive pop, 80s, 90s, a slight continuation of the last two albums of Future Bites and To the Bone. With Steven Wilson, you're not sure what you're going to get, but it's going to be different. I think this has got more of a film soundtrack. I talk about the word cinematic, and I'll probably say that word more than once in the next 10 minutes of this review. It's definitely that. It's definitely more cinematic. There are some very concise, well-written, to want of a better word, pop songs, but there's also a lot of soundscapes, much more in that sort of, they are progressive, I suppose, in terms of the instrumentation. There's lots of different instruments used on here, and it combines electronic and sort of traditional guitars and actual drums as well. So let's go through the songs first, and maybe we'll get more of an idea of what this album's all about. So we start off with Inclination. This is almost like 2 songs, really. We've got like a 3-minute instrumental that begins with a... Again, this is where I get this soundtrack sort of film vibe from it, because it has a sort of slight Ennio Morricone sort of sound. You know, like, you know, he was very famous for a lot of those sort of Western films and the music in there, and it has that sort of vibe going on there. So you have this sort of 3-minute instrumental which sort of builds and builds, and then you get basically 2 seconds of silence. That's why it feels like 2 songs, because the song that follows is almost not really connected as much to that first 3-minute introduction, but it's still the same song, Inclination. And there's a lot more electronic beats in here. There's a drum machine more than a real drums. It's very progressive pop. There's layered vocals, but there is a nice guitar solo in this, and this is the thing, the guitar isn't absent from this album at all, and a little bit more about that in a little while. It's a good start though, this song. It's a good song, Inclination. Even with its 2 parts, it builds and it sort of sets out the story of what this album's going to be about. Then we get a 2 songs really that are quite sort of similar in their sort of structure. First, we've got What Life Brings. This is to want of a better word, a pop ballad, with, again, nice bluesy guitar playing. And to be honest, this is closest, I think, to some of the Porcupine Tree ballads, you know, songs songs from like Lazarus and songs like Trains and things like that. They've got that sort of sound, close to that. It's, if you like Porcupine Tree and you like their ballads, then this song I think you'll really like. Then we've got Economies of Scale. This was one of the other ones that they released. It's again a difficult to define. It's definitely a pop, more pop than rock, I think. It's one of my favourite tracks. It sort of slowly builds up. Again, electronic beats. It's quite catchy. It sounds like it wouldn't be out of place on To the Bone, that sort of the album, not the last one, the one before that, which had a much more pop theme to it. It's definitely more like that, but it's still a very good song. Then we sort of go quite left field again. We go into real prog rock territory here, and it's called Impossible Type Rope. And this is almost well, it is pretty much an instrumental. It's very sort of jazzy. Again, cinematic is another word that I'm going to use to describe it. It's like a soundtrack to a film. I think a lot of people into the prog thing will think, yeah, this is the prog rock stuff of it, but there's lots of different types of instrumental. You got sax, you got trumpet, you all kinds of stuff like that. But it's still very sort of jazzy. It seems very sort of like a big jam that they've recorded, really. So some people will like it, some people won't. For me, it's one of those sort of tracks that I skip because it doesn't really do much for me. Then we go sort of back to the sort of pop stuff again with Rock Bottom. It's a bit similar to What Life Brings in the fact that he's a ballad similar to that. But this time, Stephen Wilson brings in his longtime collaborator, Ninit Tayeb, who duets with him on the song. It has got that real sort of, it just reminds me, I don't know whether it's because of the sort of people involved, but it's almost like Don't Give Up by Kate Bush and Peter Gabriel. It's that sort of duet, and I think that the personnel involved are very similar to Kate Bush and Peter Gabriel. It's actually a track that was actually written by Ninit, but it's a great pop song, and another one that would have fit quite well onto the bone, I think. Then the next 2 songs, we're going back to sort of more of the prog stuff again. Again, but it's not prog in the Dream Theater, lots of instrumentals, lots of big sort of virtuoso playing. It's much more prog in the sort of Pink Floyd vein, more that sort of 70s, sort of even late 60s Pink Floyd, with that soundscape, with very sort of limited amount of vocals in it. The first one, which is called Beautiful Scarecrow, again, we're using a lot of electronic sort of instruments really on this, and it's got that sort of electronic beat really to it, but it sort of builds and builds and builds like you would expect from a sort of very Pink Floyd-esque sort of song. Not much in terms of vocals, but it's still very very different and very progressive. Then you've got the 10-minute title track, the Harmony Codex. This has got a lot of female spoken word on it, and again, big soundscape. I'm going to say soundscape, cinematic. It's very much like that. It's almost like you'd expect this to be an album that you expect a film to go along with it. Really, it has that sort of a vibe to it. Really. Again, very little in the way of actual sort of singing vocals in this. It does remind me a little bit, as it reminds me of Pink Floyd. Obviously, if you remember the sort of early albums by Porcupine Tree, they were very much like that Pink Floyd era. And this song sort of harks back to that a lot. Then we're going back to the pop stuff again, the prog pop. Time is running out. Again, strong piano riff on this one. We've got more instrumentals here. We've got electronic beats. The way that the piano is at the beginning is quite sort of fast paced. It reminds me of Everything by Anathema, if you know that band. Obviously that song was on the album that was actually produced by Stephen Wilson, so there's that connection again there. But again, it sort of develops into a much more of a Peter Gabriel sort of early 70s Genesis. But there's a nice guitar solo in it, and as I said, I've talked about the guitar in this album. It's definitely there, but it's not like, it doesn't drive the songs, the guitar. The guitar is really there to add a bit of colour and a bit of sort of texture to the songs. There's some really good guitar solos that are bluesy or subtle, but they're still quite high in the mix, and they also use a lot to sort of finish the songs. They're sort of the outro guitar solos. I think that they're very, very well placed in this album, and if you're a fan of guitar when it comes to Stephen Wilson, then I think you'll really like it. So we talked about there's the song has this sort of 70s sort of Genesis sort of influence again. Then we go to the song called Actual Brutal Facts. I think it's changing up again. We've got a nice clean guitar, but we've got that backbeat sort of electronic beat coming back into it. And then Stephen Wilson's voice is not very well recognised. It's a very low register. It's almost as if it's been sampled. It's a very deep voice. And it's, to me, when I first listened to it, I thought, this sounds like Faith No More when they go their most progressive, eccentric sort of type. And this is what reminds me of this song. It's a good song though, quite like it. Then obviously we're ending with the final song. 10th song is called Staircase, and this basically throws everything into the mix that's gone before it really. It's a difficult song to say, what is it? Is it rock music? Is it pop music? Is it progressive rock? Progressive pop? Is it cinematic? Is it film track? What exactly is it? It's difficult to define. Basically, if I was going to try and define this song and especially this album, it's almost like it's rock, pop, electronic, wrapped up in a sort of progressive sort of rapper really. It's very much touching on all of those sort of genres of music, but you can't deny that it isn't progressive overall. And as I said, the guitar here is much more used than it was in the last few albums, which I think is a very good thing. And Stephen Wilson is just a guy that just can't be defined. Whether it's his solo stuff, whether it's Porcupine Tree, I don't think really developed a huge amount. Certainly after In Absentia, that the albums just expanded on that really. Some of them, they got heavier, they got more prog metal, more metal came into their progressive sort of styles, but you could tell they're all the same. Stephen Wilson's other solo albums, though, quite different. Very progressive, very 70s progressive, very sort of 90s progressive, electronic, pop. And then you take something like Hand Cannot Raise, which for me I think is his best solo album. And that's a very much a prog rock in the vein of, those sort of concept albums of the 70s, really. So what comes next for Stephen Wilson? I'm not quite sure. I mean, it's not going to be the Harmony Codex Part 2. He's going to redefine, he's going to bring new stuff into it, and hopefully we'll get another good album. So to conclude really this review, is this album any good? Yes, it is. If you've liked any of Stephen Wilson's solo albums. If you like any of Porcupine Tree, you will like stuff within this album. There'll be stuff that you won't like as much, but it's definitely a good album. Does it break ground? No, I don't think it does. Even though there's some different sounds in there, I don't think the songs are quite like really jumping out as being like, this is the best song that Stephen Wilson has ever done. Maybe it's also one of those albums though there's a bit of a grower. Those sort of longer cinematic songs, you know, they don't always sort of like hit straight away anyway, and I think that those are balanced with the sort of very immediate poppier songs that do hit quite immediately, so that gives you the hook that makes you want to keep listening to it because you like those songs and you get into them quite easily. But then I think as you listen to this album more and more, you'll start to realize that the sort of longer pieces, the more sort of centric stuff, is actually some of the best stuff on the album. So let me know if you've listened to this album. What do you think? What do you think of Stephen Wilson's solo work anyway? Which is your best album? Is there an album you think, oh, I wish he did another album that was more similar to that? But I'm interested to know what you think of this album. I think of the last two albums, he probably lost a little bit of his sort of core fan base. Could this album be the one that brings them back? I don't know, but let me know in the comments what you think. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm doing some more music stuff. I'm doing some more non-review stuff. I've got some ranking videos that I've got planned, but I'm also doing some other things that are going to be a bit different on the sort of rock and heavy metal music theme, and I hope you stick around for them. So if you're not a subscriber, please subscribe to get some of them. Of course, we do a lot of beer videos on this channel, and we will continue to do so. So hopefully this has been a nice little palate cleanser from the next beer review video. Yeah, hope you've enjoyed it, and until the next one, you know what you're going to do. Keep on rocking.